delighted to welcome you to the first ever Edmonton WaiTALK. Wai is Women in AI, and we are a global organization. We're a do tank, we're grassroots, we're 100% volunteer, and we organize events around the world with items and topics that are of interest to our audience. And so I'm really thrilled to welcome you to our first ever Edmonton WaiTALK today. As mentioned, my name is Bernie Kollman. I'm the moderator for this session, and I'm also the city lead for Wai for Edmonton. My background is in IT. I worked for 30 years in the industry, and I concluded my career as a vice president for public sector for IBM here in Alberta. During my career, I had the pleasure of doing outreach into the community, working with grade 9 young women, encouraging them in conjunction with the U of A to consider a career in STEM. We had a real army of dedicated volunteers during that time. Over 10 years, we reached over 4,000 young women. And also during my career at IBM, I had the opportunity to be the co-founder and co-chair of the IBM Center for Advanced Studies, a global entity bringing collaboration of research from the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary into IBM in partnership with the government of Alberta. So we were able to invest millions of dollars and get emerging research into the hands of Alberta researchers to help them advance their work. So this today for me is a confluence of those two initiatives. We get to talk about career opportunities in AI, but we get to hear directly from researchers, women that are leading in this industry and have come from different paths to come to this career path, and to really, open up and share with us today, how did they get to this place? How did they choose AI as their field of research? What were some of their obstacles? What were some of their pinnacles? And, really to have a candid conversation with them about, what it's taken to get to this point. We all know that AI is one of the hottest things on the planet right now, and that the U of A is world leading in this area. So I feel very honored that these three women have agreed to spend an hour with us and give us an insight into what it's taken for them to get to this point. And I also have to thank the Alberta Machine Intelligence Institute, also known as Amii, for being a partner in this program that we're offering you today. I happen to also be the co-chair and co-founder of AlbertaWomen.AI, which is an Amii initiative. And so these things all, interrelate and work together. And so we're just delighted to be working in partnership with Amii on this initiative today. So let's get started. But just before I do that, I want to make sure that you know that you probably have questions. I've come up with a list of questions, and I'm going to take the panel through it, but you probably also have questions. So I'm going to keep an eye on the chat. I want you to queue up, that you do have a question. And based on how many we have, I'll leave time at the end and ask you to ask your question directly to the panel as opposed to through me. So we will open up the mics at that time, and you can ask your questions directly. So maybe just put your name in the chat that you have a question, and if you're too shy to ask it, I guess you can put it in there and I'll ask it for you, but would love to have the ability to call on you and have you engage with the panel directly. So with that, let's get started. Obviously, the bios were sent out. You joined up because you were interested from hearing from these women, but I did ask them to start by telling me in a couple of minutes, in their own words, what their area of research is. And I asked them to do it in a way that, a family member might understand, or they might talk about at a cocktail party. Remember those things where we used to actually stand up and have a drink with other people in person? So I'm going to cue them up. I'm going to start with Alona, and then I'm going to invite Nidhi and Anna to each go in order and give us a brief introduction on yourself and your area of research.
Great, thanks so much, Bernie. I'm Alona Fyshe. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Alberta, and my position is actually joint between psychology and computing science. I study language in the brain, and so what that means is I take brain images while people read, and then train computer models to do the task of predicting the next word in a sequence. And it turns out once computer models are trained to do that task well, predicting the next word in a sequence, the parameters that they've tuned to do that task actually are highly correlated to brain images collected while people read the same text. so that we can use that fact to study how the brain processes language and how information moves around. And we can also use it to improve computer models of language.
Great. I'm Nidhi Hegde. Thank you, Bernie. And this is such a great event. Thank you for organizing it. So I study ethics generally in machine learning, but more specifically, I look at privacy and fairness. When you look at machine learning algorithms, they use a lot of data, and we produce ourselves a lot of data about ourselves as we use the various apps and all that we have on our phones, for instance. And this data can be used for good. It can be used to provide us with services that we want, recommendations that we want, or optimal paths to go somewhere. But there's also a potential for this data to reveal private information about yourself that you don't want revealed. So I'm interested in looking at how to mitigate undesirable effects like that, and like the other issue, which is bias in machine learning. Machine learning outcomes, decisions that can be made from machine learning outcomes can be biased for several reasons. And this is another ethics issue that I'm interested in looking at how to mitigate in machine learning algorithms.
Excellent. So my research area is reinforcement learning. So that's kind of a whole subfield of machine learning, which looks at how decision-making agents can learn to behave well, given just some reward signal. So there's different learning cases, one where you're told this is the correct answer to this problem you're trying to solve, and others where you get told, good job, bad job. And so that second case is a lot harder, but also a lot more interesting. And specifically, I like looking at cases where the environment is changing, because most machine learning algorithms make an assumption that you have a sufficient description of everything that matters right within the data. And that's just not true in this framework where we're talking about an agent making decisions, going along through the world and constantly making decisions. So yeah, changing environments, that's my fascinating area. And I used to always use the Mars rover to explain this, especially to family members. And I was very excited recently that we had an AI seminar from someone who worked on the Mars rover, who was talking about how curiosity, or how detecting novel events is going to be used on the most in Perseverance. And that was very exciting to me, because for the longest time I'd explain about it as if, imagine a rover going around the world, going around Mars, and the battery levels change and all this stuff changes. But then I had to add the caveat that it turns out the Mars rover did not have much memory, so it was not doing anything at all related to what I was doing. But it's becoming more true as we go along, which is very exciting.
Well, and it sounds like you're ahead of your time, and so are the other women on this panel today. As I mentioned, we're just honored that you would spend some time with us, because you're doing incredibly important work that is leading in the world with one of the top research organizations in the world. And so I'm curious to know, where did you start in your life journey? And, sometimes we look at people in your roles and we aspire or think, how could we ever attain that? And I think sometimes knowing where you came from, what it was like growing up, what your family situation was, might give us a little peek into that answer. And this time I'm going to go Nidhi, Alona, and then Anna. So Nidhi.
Well, I actually grew up in Edmonton. My parents are immigrants from India. And so I lived sort of a double life growing up. There was the Indian life at home, and then the non-Indian, the Canadian life outside. So, I was constantly used to, I guess, living two separate faces of the same coin somehow at the same time. Yeah, I'm not sure what else about that is relevant, but what that showed me, I guess, is that is a way to sort of integrate myself into a situation. And so I guess that helped me figure out how to do that. My father was an engineer, and then he changed jobs. So I guess I sort of took after him on that aspect. My mother was not a technical person, but she worked a lot of jobs, and she was always busy, always doing something. So those are the things I learned as, growing up in my family, is how to be able to integrate into things, and a work ethic, I guess.
Outstanding. Alona.
Great. I also grew up in Edmonton. My parents were both nurses. So we had some very interesting dinner time conversations that probably would not have flown at other people's dinner table. But it actually really got me interested in science as a young kid. And I remember reading through a medical textbook. I had a medical textbook that I would constantly be looking up different diseases that I thought I had and reading about them. But my father actually was really interested in art. And so he encouraged me to be an artist. And so some people have parents who encourage them to be engineers or doctors or lawyers. And my father really wanted me to be an artist. So I actually did start my first year of university in the arts program. But computing science was just way more fun. That was the most fun homework of any homework I had. And so I ended up in computing science.
Interesting. Anna.
Okay, this is great because I'm going to add some contrast points. So I grew up in Saskatchewan, not Alberta, not Edmonton. So, so different. But my mother was an English teacher and then a nurse, and my father was an engineer. And so I was always encouraged in kind of academic pursuits. And I had this very distinct, I either wanted to be a university professor, probably in physics, or a writer. Decided the writing was easier to do as a side hobby than physics, which I do believe is still true. So the kind of science bent was always there from an early age. But then have a fairly conservative Christian background. So right out of high school, I went to Bible college for a year, and like a typical stereotype, met my husband, and he's wonderful. So I'm very glad we did it, but we got married right away. So then we were in rural Saskatchewan working for a while to try and save up some money to go back to school. And that didn't last long. I could not stand being out of academia. I started taking distance ed. And this was, by the way, you mailed assignments in. You did not email assignments in. This was a while ago. So the academic pull has always been there. When I finally, I learned to program websites because we had a cousin who had a business in that, and was like, that's more interesting than waitressing, so let's give that a shot. And my husband was the artist in this case. He did the design side. But then I got really tired of programming for websites because it was the same thing over and over again. So I was like, forget this computer science thing. It's all right. It's kind of fun. It's like doing Sudokus, but it gets dull after a while. So I want to go back to physics. But I did make the small concession that programming is practical, so I'm going to continue taking CS classes. And that turned out to be a good thing because while I was taking my beginning physics and just starting to get into quantum mechanics, I was also taking the introductory Java and discrete mathematics and whatever was the requirements in the first year. But not that those classes really gave me the taste of it, but in those classes, I heard about the AI seminar, which has been running for decades at the University of Alberta. And that was where I started to discover that there was a more interesting side to computer science, that it wasn't just about programming the same kind of thing over and over again. It was also about understanding fundamental things like what is the nature of intelligence and how does it relate to human intelligence, as Alona's work does. And that got me intrigued. And then the next step in the development was I talked to my physics prof about what opportunities there were for summer research. And she said, maybe in fourth year, you might be able to go to Toronto and work at the lab there. And then I talked to CS profs and they're like, sure, yeah, we hire high school students. We've got research projects going over the summer. So I was like, wait 4 years to do something interesting or do something interesting right now. And that was kind of the beginning of the switch over entirely into diving into this world of artificial intelligence, and specifically the kind of esoteric side. What does it mean to be intelligent? How do we program that in computers? What does that tell us about human intelligence and biological intelligence? And so I've always had this very academic push. But then it took a really long time. I was in school for quite a while working on my master's and then Ph.D. And after quite a while, I decided I needed a break. So I took a couple of terms to teach at a Augustana campus, which is a rural campus of University of Alberta. I wanted to see, is it truly a professor position I want, or is it teaching that I love the most? What kind of balance in my life do I want? I discovered I do love teaching, but it also sucks up all available time. And then Amii had started this not-for-profit branch, so doing industry outreach. And like I mentioned, I'm a very, very academic, head in the clouds kind of person. But there was this interesting opportunity to join the team to build out the industry outreach side of AI. And so I ended up switching from teaching to doing that full-time, and was formerly the managing director of the applied science team. And that was a really fascinating period where I got to see the entirely practical side of machine learning. I had so much exposure to the kind of deep research and the eventual potential and the long-term research goals. But this was all about what can we do now to see results? What can we take from the research community, but actually turn into practical effects in the real world right now? And it's been a fascinating kind of pinballing back and forth between these different worlds and seeing how they can come together really well, but you need people communicating on all sides. So that in a nutshell is my journey.
So Anna, was it you said physics or AI, and then the computing science was the AI piece? Was that in your undergrad? Like, was that like in year 1 or year 2, or where were you in your academic career when you discovered computing science and AI?
The discovery of AI was quite early in the actual practical sense. I mentioned I'd been working as a web programmer, but had only done a little bit of formal study. So I was essentially in first year computing science, but the grad students and professors at the AI seminar were just really approachable. So they were totally enthusiastic about having little me in there asking, what's a heuristic? What's this search thing you're talking about? All these words, I have no idea what they mean, but they keep coming up. And it was just kind of the friendliness and openness of those people to be like, Rich Sutton would dive into a conversation about whether the reward hypothesis of reinforcement learning actually makes sense. And I had a long conversation with Michael Bowling about why can't we train robots like we train dogs? And they were totally okay with that. I was coming from a very beginner standpoint, not even having learned about a breadth first search in the computer science formal education yet.
So undergrad and early, and then people that were just willing to answer those questions. I am going to come back and ask you about being a female in this area. But before I do that, I do want to hear from Nidhi and then Alona, the same question. When and how did you discover the possibility of AI as your career path?
So it wasn't something that I had planned on in the beginning. My undergrad actually was in biochemistry here at the U of A. But I didn't have a very good experience. The advisor I was assigned was not very encouraging to me, and he totally turned me off of studying this field. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do now? And what I really liked in high school and before that was math. But then I had this practical side of me, like, how am I going to get a job with math? So then I did an after degree in computing science. And then I did a master's thinking, oh, this will help me get a good job and I'll get a job in computing science. But then when I was doing the master's, I discovered that research was so much fun, and that really was a huge interest of mine since then. And my advisor at the time, suggested that I maybe want to continue in research. So that's how I ended up doing a Ph.D. in computing science. But the topic I was working on at the time was more related to network science and networks, information theory, stochastic theory, that kind of stuff. And I went to Europe for my postdoc. And then I stayed there for like 18 years. Couldn't find my way out, but it was just, and I worked in a lot of industry research labs there. I started out my postdoc in INRIA, which is the National Institute of Research there. And then ended up working on some industry research labs, which were really great. And eventually the job required me to learn other things. And that's when I looked into machine learning and how this can be used to solve problems sort of in real time, or when the data is dynamic, or when the situation is always changing. And so that's how I came into machine learning. And as I learned more and more and worked a little more in machine learning, it's these areas of privacy and fairness that really stood out for me. And then I came back to Canada I guess 3 years ago when RBC opened Borealis AI lab in Edmonton.
Right.
And I was the applied research lead at that lab for 2 years. And then I made the switch to academia last year, almost nearly, yeah, a little over a year ago.
So I'm still on. It took you 18 years to get out of Europe. And how did that happen? So welcome back to Edmonton. That's pretty awesome. And that you found machine learning, it sounds like a little bit later in your career, or more recently, not later, but more recently in your career. So that's,
yeah, I did. It wasn't, I mean, it sounds, I think when you look at my story, it sort of sounds like I'm just kind of meandering around. But it was actually more strategic than it sounds, because every time I either switched industry labs or looked into a new topic, it was because acquiring that skill was going to help me with some research I had in mind. And so that's how I kind of grew into doing something. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that RBC brought you back. No, I didn't think it sounded meandering. I thought it sounded all pretty exciting and some wonderful opportunities. And it's interesting how those opportunities bring you to where you are, right? And so, Alona, how did you end up from art, from your dad encouraging you to be an artist, to brain research now in AI? So tell us about that.
Yeah, that's funny. So during my undergrad, I was taking some genetics classes because I was so interested in genetics and how DNA worked to give us traits and stuff like that. And I happened upon this book called Digital Biology, which is about using computers to understand genetics at sort of a different level. So using machine learning and modeling to understand how DNA creates phenotype and stuff like that. So I thought that was really cool, but it didn't occur to me that anybody at the University of Alberta might actually be doing that. I just sort of left it at that. And then I applied for some internships. The University of Alberta has a really good internship program. And I got one of the most coveted internships at IBM, and I was going to move to Toronto, and I had already kind of like said yes to them. And then this request for an interview popped up from a research group at the University of Alberta, and I thought, I might as well just do another interview. I'll just do it just for practice. It's good to practice interviewing. So basically, I didn't prepare very much for the interview at all. And I showed up. I thought they wanted somebody to rewrite their website, which fine, you know, it's great things. People need to do that, but it wasn't like my core. But I got to the interview and it turned out that they were doing the digital biology thing I was so interested in, I had been reading about. And so and it blew my mind that up until that point in my undergrad, I didn't know that computers could do something that you hadn't explicitly programmed them to do. And so I had this weird conversation with them in the interview, like they were like, we have to measure the accuracy of the model because we don't know how well it will do. And I was like, but you wrote the computer program, so how can you not know how well it will do? And they were like, well, the data is part of the program. I was like, what is going? This is amazing. This is so exciting. And at the same time, I was also going, I am not prepared for this interview. This is terrible. I'm totally flubbing my only chance. This is happening right now. So after the interview, I went back to my desk and I wrote them an email. I was like, I'm so sorry. I don't feel like I was prepared enough, but I was really interested in the job, blah, blah, blah. And as you can probably guess, I ended up doing my internship with them. Even though I paid a little less and it wasn't IBM, I didn't care because it was just the most cool thing. And that really was the beginning of my research career. Because I stayed and did my master's with the same set of advisors on a similar project related to what I had done for that internship. And then after that, I was getting ready I was finishing up my master's and not sure what to do next. Sort of thinking I would spend some time in industry just to make sure I really liked computers. I don't know. And at the time, Google had this advertising campaign saying like, are you the smartest person you know? If so, apply to Google. And I most certainly am not the smartest person I know. I have never thought that about myself. So I completely discredited myself for that particular job. But the person that I had trained who took over my internship after me interviewed with Google and got a job. And I thought to myself, if I trained him to do the job that I used to do, and he's working at Google, I'm pretty sure I could work at Google. So I applied for a job at Google and got it. And at the time they had just opened a new office in Pittsburgh, and it was quite small, 32 people. And it sounded like a neat opportunity. It was right on CMU campus, so it had very strong ties to the university and had a lot of machine learning focus. So I thought that would be a neat way to do something in industry, but also keep some machine learning in my daily life. So I went there, and Google was wonderful. I learned so much working with smart people. It was amazing. They had a lot of very senior engineers at that office because it was so small. I learned so much. It was awesome. Google treats their employees really well. At least they did in 2007. But I just didn't feel motivated by what I was working on. I didn't feel like when I woke up in the morning on Monday, like, I can't wait to get to work and work on what I was working on was shopping. It was like their shopping interviews. Just like didn't motivate me. So I felt like I had to go back to school, and then I went back to do my PhD at Carnegie Mellon. So I basically just crossed the street. I was working in one building, and the next day I was like across the street at CMU. So it worked out really well, but yeah. And there I met my advisor, Tom Mitchell, who introduced me to brain imaging. It was a great, yeah, path.
I don't think I heard how you came back to Edmonton though.
Oh, right. Okay. So then after my PhD, I felt like I'd been talking too long. I got my first faculty job at the University of Victoria, which was also wonderful. And I had really settled in and wasn't really looking for a job, but then the University of Alberta had this special joint position come up, and they asked me to apply for it. And I thought, well, I mean, that would be wonderful to go back to Edmonton and my family's here, my husband's family is here, and we have 2 young children. So at the time we only had 1, but now we have 2. And so coming back to Edmonton was just like such a no-brainer to both be in this place where I had started, and there was great AI, wonderful funding, great collaborators, and also both of our families. Like it was better than even living by the ocean. That's a hard thing to beat.
I love to hear that. And I'm sorry, I did only ask you how you picked your specialty, but I got into your story and I felt like I wanted to keep hearing it. So no, it's great. It's great to understand the paths that you each followed to make your way, from Edmonton back to Edmonton, or Saskatchewan to Edmonton, the opportunities you had on the way, and the competition that you faced in every encounter to get the role that you got in these leading organizations, and such rich opportunities. I mentioned I was going to come up and ask you about being a woman in these roles, but I think instead I'm going to leave the question broader. And I'm going to ask you first about a couple of challenges that you had to overcome in your career, but then I'll come back and ask you for a couple of highlights as well. And I am going to remind people that you have a chance from the audience to ask questions, but I need to know that you have some. So if you could queue up, we're going to leave that to the last 10 minutes or so you have time, but we're going to take the mics off and let you ask your own questions. And I also wanted to put you to the chat. Somebody posted the seminar that was mentioned by Anna in case somebody else wants to take it. So the link is there for that as well. So this time I'm going to go to Nidhi, and I'm going to ask her for, why don't we start with the challenges? And then I'll go to Alona and with Anna on that one. So Nidhi, what are some of the challenges that you had to overcome to get where you are today?
Well, because I changed jobs fairly frequently, I think I worked in 3 different industry research labs in France. And thereby, my research topics changed over time. I was always in new research communities, and so I was always, sort of the new person all the time. And research communities have their own sort of culture, and it's all very different. For example, the original research community I'm from, which is like performance evaluation, I would call it, that I'm still a part of. It's the ACM Sigmetrics group. The flagship conference there is, once a year. The paper submissions are like 20 pages. The papers are reviewed thoroughly. There's a program committee meeting to discuss the papers, and then there's a selection, and it's a really tight-knit community that, and then in machine learning, for example, these conferences are huge. They're like thousands of people in the conferences, and there's no program committee meeting to discuss papers. So the culture in the various research communities is very different. So the way that you sort of approach people that you may want to collaborate with, or, the way you do research with the people that you're working with can vary. So that was a bit of a challenge for me, that every time I had to sort of figure out what's the lay of the land here, and how to go about it. But on the flip side, the good thing about that was that I was always learning new things, even on the technical side. So that was a good thing. I guess that's what I would say would be the major challenge I've had is adapting to new environments all the time.
Alona.
Good, thanks. I couldn't remember what's next. I'd say my biggest challenge has always been not giving myself the credit I deserve. And so you heard that a little bit in my story that I didn't think I would be good enough for a job at Google. So I didn't apply until it was clear to me that I should consider myself for that. I also, when I applied to grad school at CMU, I would never have applied to CMU, but it was literally across the street from where I was working. And I was working with people who had CMU PhDs, and I noticed that they were just regular people. So I applied there as well as to a few universities in Canada, but I would never have applied to CMU otherwise. And I've had experiences where I'm talking to people about like, oh, how did you get invited to give that talk there? And they said, well, I just emailed them and told them I was going to be in the city and I wanted to give them a talk if they wanted one. And like, just like having my mind blown repeatedly that like, you can just put yourself out there. And that has been just sort of overcoming this sort of roadblock that I had in my own way, that like, I wasn't good enough. I had to work much harder than everyone around me because I wasn't good enough. And just sort of like releasing that and letting myself just try, I guess.
Yeah, well, you are definitely good enough. You're amazing. But that is interesting, is that little voice in our head that sometimes is our biggest obstacle. And thank you for being vulnerable to share that. That is true of many of us. And so good for you to be self-aware, and by having success, being willing to continue to tackle that one. And that was a great share. Thank you, Anna.
The funny thing hearing Alana's story is she was one of those grad students that dazzled me when I first started going to the AI seminar. And that actually has been a really important thing in my development. Similar to Alana, it's like realizing that you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, and it is definitely not correlated with how smart you are. How smart you feel is very different from how smart you are, especially since there's a variety of things that need to be done. So thank goodness Google does not do the "are you the smartest person you know" advertising campaign, because what a way to guarantee you're going to have a bunch of assholes at your company too. But anyway, yeah, the finding out that the people I hugely looked up to had those moments, frequent moments of feeling like they weren't smart enough, like any moment somebody would find out and take back their Canada Research Chair or take back their ICOR funding or whatever. And I'm like, but you're brilliant. I don't understand how you could possibly think that. I know how I could feel that, because I all the time don't know the answer. And that's been really important, and it's been reinforced so consistently across my life that the people I look up to and admire the most are also fighting those feelings of insecurity. And part of that is natural, because you're actually smart enough to be aware that you don't know everything. And at that point, it means you actually know enough to know you don't know everything. That's actually a really important place to be, especially in a research career. The much more dangerous thing is thinking you know everything there is to know about your area. And that is less exciting research, less progress, less good interactions with people around you. I was really lucky, and it is totally happenstance that I ended up in Edmonton at the time when we were just starting, AICML was just starting, and Rich Sutton was just starting to give presentations, and Michael Bowling and Dale Shermans had come back, and all this exciting AI research was starting to be nurtured. And like I said, I A, thought I was going to be in physics, and B, never had any plan to come to Edmonton specifically. It was the internet access is why I ended up in Edmonton, because we moved from rural Saskatchewan to Saskatoon to get better internet access. And then the companies we were working with tended to be in Edmonton. So we moved to Edmonton, and then I couldn't stay away from school. So I went to U of A, and that worked out so beautifully for me, although in a bizarre and unanticipated way. The being kind of flexible and willing to adapt to what's going on and not hold tight to this preconceived idea of I'm getting this degree for this purpose. I'm going to have this life path. Things are going to happen at this point. I have never been right about any of those details. And even though I'm back in academia, I'm finishing my PhD again, I don't expect I'll be a professor at this point. I'm kind of looking more in the research, industry research career, but I'm not going to place any bets on that because opportunities arise. And if you're pursuing things you enjoy and doing it in a way that you value, then the opportunities that come up will be the right opportunities. You'll lock yourself in a box if you actually pre-decide what's actually going to go on, or decide I have to do these 10 things because they're what's recommended for success in this industry. I don't know. This industry was very different 10 years ago. The things I needed to do for success was study the why is a man whole round and all the programming puzzles that all the tech industries were using as their filter interviews. And that has never been me and never been usefully leading to exciting things, but just kind of this meandering path. Almost everyone I know who loves where they are got there by a really meandering path.
Well, I would say that you're all humble. So that's the other side then of being, you know, too arrogant or thinking you're too good. But I also know from working with grade 9 young women, one of the things we used to tell them is, why not you? Like, why not me? If there is something that I want to do. And it sounds like that's something that, you know, is pervasive, you know, whether it's gender related or not. It sounds like something that we should be aware of, and getting out of your comfort zone and challenging yourself to do things that you might not otherwise do can often lead to wonderful outcomes. And you're all amazing examples of that. So I did want to circle back and, sorry, Anna.
I just wanted to interject. That's actually a really fascinating thing that the latest AI ethics and machine learning developments have been illustrating, the critical nature of having a variety of people working on a problem. That it's way too easy to get locked into one specific way of looking at it. So if you're looking at people who are succeeding in an area and thinking that's not me, that might actually be evidence that they desperately need you in that area. Because we have pushed ourselves into so many corners that we didn't need to make these mistakes, but we did because of the kind of uniformity of the people working on the questions. And we really have to get away from that. And a lot of the conflicts that are arising in AI are just kind of straightforward empirical evidence about the importance of diversity in every endeavor.
I love that. That fits very nicely. So hopefully we'll motivate some people on the call today to think about that. So I did promise to do the other side of this. So maybe quickly, I mean, you're very accomplished. You've already highlighted on some of the things that you would have identified as being successes in your careers, but tell us about an accomplishment, something that you did that you're particularly proud of, a highlight in your career to date. I'm going to go Alona, Nidhi, and then Anna. So Alona.
There's a lot of like pivot points in my career, and I told you about what I've been doing the internship at the University of Alberta. But another pivot point is when I was at the University of Victoria, this like award came across my desk, like call for it was more like a grant you had to apply, and I kind of ignored it. But then my dean sent me an email like the weekend before it was due. You should really apply for this. So I was like, oh my God, I guess if the dean tells you, you have to do it. So I wrote up this like application, sent it in the following week. And so it was the CFAR Global Scholars Award, and it absolutely changed my career trajectory. So through that, I've met like a network of amazing people who I continue to work with now. It was a funding it was very generous funding, but actually what was more important was the network of people that I met. And it changed my connections in Canada and across the world. It was absolutely another inflection point in my career. So I'm very proud of myself for having won that.
Well, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Nidhi.
I guess one point in my career, which was very different from what was before, is when I joined Borealis AI 3 years ago. Because even though I had been looking at machine learning, you know, through various other perspectives, looking at it, you know, sort of through a theoretical approach for solving the problems that I was solving at the time, or using the results from there for something else. This job was actually just full on machine learning. And I really felt like I questioned why they hired me sometimes because I felt like everyone here, you know, went to school in machine learning, did their degree in machine learning, have done internships in machine learning, and everything in their CV is machine learning. And here I am coming from all these other subject areas, you know, what am I doing here? But it actually turned out to be a great thing because I ended up having a team of my own to manage. I ended up discussing with people in the bank about what problems they're interested in and making that connection from a practical problem to what research problem we should be solving to get there. You know, building frameworks, and it was an experience where I was sort of left to do it on my own. There wasn't someone guiding me technically. It was, you know, up to me to either do it or fail. So that was a moment in my career that I highlight as a way of making me sort of grow in a different way.
Awesome. Yeah, those inflection points are so important. Anna.
My first instinct was, oh man, I haven't completed anything. But in the spirit of don't be too humble, I'm really looking forward to getting my Ph.D. done. But again, that's future. It's been, I don't know, I just can't emphasize enough how much it is not about what I thought I was going to accomplish, but what I have the opportunity to do right now. So through working with Amii, which again, was not something, actually a few years before the position opened, the email went around that they were talking about doing this. And I was like, oh, not me. I don't like applied stuff. I like theoretical stuff. This is not for me. But then seizing that opportunity meant I had a chance to build the Coursera course on applied machine learning and work with a fantastic team, meet some amazing people, and learn so much about business and about the perception of AI in the world. So I tried to trying to find the balance of setting goals that can kind of push you forward and help you accomplish things you're proud of, and also celebrating the successes that you happen to have along the way is a really interesting balance.
Okay. Well, I've got some audience questions, and someone here is having mic support issues, so they've asked me to ask their questions. So these are from someone named Alvin, and I think Alvin thinks I'm doing a little softball on you. He wants to go a little deeper into some of the technology, and he's going to ask you, first of all, and maybe just flag me if you think you have an answer. What stage, in comparison to the internet development revolution stage, do you think current AI revolution is at? For example, are we in the 90s, 2000, 2010 of the internet revolution? So it's an interesting kind of a crystal ball question, or a comparator of a maturity of where we're at with this technology. And so, Nidhi, I'll put you on the spot. I don't see anyone flagging me. So Nidhi, what do you think?
I would say we are probably in the 2000s of those three choices there. I wouldn't pick 90s because I think there was, you know, some important developments that happened maybe a decade ago or so that really pushed this whole area of machine learning and AI into this large area that it is now. Whereas this, you know, this conference NeurIPS used to be like this little thing where people would go skiing in the morning and then have conferences and, you know, the sessions in the afternoon or something like that. And now it's like 8,000 people. So there was already something that happened, the 90s thing. And I'm saying it's not later than 2000s because we're still, you know, research is really ongoing on a lot of things today. I mean, you know, people say, oh, let's use computer vision to, you know, detect tumor cells in these images. Well, it's not always that clear. It's not, you know, there aren't really products out there that give you such a great accuracy that you could just use that and forget it. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but there's also a lot of work to be done in terms of understanding really how these algorithms work. Because a lot of times we don't know how these work. They work and they're great, but you know, how do they work, and why is this giving me this outcome? You know, these sort of things are huge questions. And I also think there's an engineering part of machine learning AI that hasn't happened yet. You know, other fields that have clear engineering disciplines with standards and rules, you know, are these older established professional fields. And I think in machine learning and AI, we're not there yet. We don't have standards on how certain AI algorithms should be built, or, you know, what the limits should be and shouldn't be. So I think there's a whole engineering aspect that still needs to be done. So yeah, I'd say we're sort of somewhere in the young, maybe teenager ages, if I could use a human's life as, as a metaphor.
I see Anna and Alona nodding, so I'm going to ask them a different question. So Alona, what area do you think AI, ML, DL would have the most impact in the immediate future? And the examples are autonomous driving, image video processing, speech, finance, biotech, or something else. So where do you see this having the biggest impact immediately?
That's funny because I wanted to answer the last question, so I'm going to do.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead. You can go ahead, answer the last one, and then this one.
I just wanted to posit that the internet revolution might not actually be over, and that it might be ongoing. And I think also the AI revolution is ongoing, and we're going to see multiple sort of fits and starts as we have already. So, you know, I mean, the internet, of course, there is huge changes in the 2000s, in the 2010s, but like social networks have just absolutely changed the way that we interact with each other, and having really powerful computers in our pockets has absolutely changed the way that we interact with each other, and has changed the way that some people in some countries are able to interact with the internet at all. I mean, it's absolutely changed the world, and so that will continue to happen. And then I don't know if I have a great answer for what I think the next most impactful thing will be. I think precision health is one area that I am excited about. I'm not actually actively involved in, but I think is a place where there's clear opportunities.
Anna, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the fascinating things we ran into at Amii was how much the application areas of machine learning don't necessarily fall along the same lines as like health or driving, manufacturing, whatever, because it's math under the hood. It's some fundamental math going on. And that means where it's applicable are places where you have lots of data. It's changing how we interact with large data sources and what we can find out from them. And in that sense, I'd agree with Nidhi that we're in the kind of 2000s era. It's started to be ubiquitous. People know about it, but almost nobody understands how it works or what the true potential is. And we're finding out and making lots of mistakes along the way. And I think that's kind of distinct. AI as it is now is also totally distinct from the scary sci-fi AI, the truly independent reasoning systems. We've got a few really gnarly problems to sort out before we have, I think, progress on that front. But on the practical side, yeah, precision health is a big one because, of course, we have lots of data about health. And this year in particular, last year in particular, we've seen the importance of being able to deal with lots of data and respond fast. So I think it's going to go hand in hand, though, with sorting out, as Nidhi's research is, how do we deal with the privacy implications? How do we deal with the fact that you used to be able to do things in public and maybe not everyone would see, but now public has a different meaning and has different implications. And it actually does parallel a lot of the issues we've had around the internet too. It's adding an interesting kind of complexity to the world, and I want to see it get more democratized. So it is something people are comfortable with and aware of how what they're doing is affecting it, how it can affect what they're doing in the world.
Okay, there's a couple of questions here about your advice for people. And one of them is relating to if you want to be an entrepreneur and work in AI. And then there's a related one about students deciding on pursuing research or industry in AI. So I think I'm going to put those together and you can answer one or both, whatever you feel comfortable with. And I haven't started with you, Anna. I always end with you. So I'm conscious I'm going to start and then go Nidhi and then Alona. So Anna, you're up.
It's because I could feel all the time. So students, listen close. If you have an opportunity to do an internship that looks exciting to you, do it. If you have an opportunity to do a research placement or work on a project that is exciting to you, do it. Don't stress too much about following, like, oh, well, I know I'm going to work at Google, so I have to do a Google or an IBM internship beforehand. maybe not. Maybe there will be totally new labs by the time you're done your degree. But do search for the variety that feeds your enthusiasm and interest. And that kind of relates to the entrepreneurial advice too. Hang out with people who are talking about interesting things, go to the AI meetup and the AI seminars at the school, and take online courses if you find them helpful, and just talk with lots of people. Like, follow your dreams, but not in the way that like it's going to work out, you're going to have a job doing exactly making the art that you always wanted to make, but your dreams will be relevant in some ways.
Okay, Nidhi and then Alona.
Well, I agree with the variety of perspectives comment. I do think, it's always good to meet with people different than you, who have a different perspective to offer. And this is particularly true for, an entrepreneur who wants to build something. You need to have different people to help you build it. You need to have someone who understands the market, and therefore understands people. You need to have someone who really knows the technical stuff. So you need a variety of people for building something. And the same thing goes for if you want to pursue, and you're not sure you want to pursue research or you want to pursue industry, try it all out. If you're in school, get a research internship with a professor, a summer research opportunity with a professor, see how that works. And yeah, I think Alona said this earlier, put yourself out there. Don't, censor yourself. Don't put limits on yourself, just go ahead and try for opportunities. And I don't think you should like shy away from things that look like they might be, I don't know, too much out of your comfort zone. You should go out of your comfort zone a little bit and see, where you might fit. Sometimes going out of that comfort zone is when you discover something that you didn't think of before, and now it's also exciting.
Alona.
Good. I think keeping your sort of options open is good. I spent a lot of my PhD sort of, people would ask me what I was planning to do after, and that's like a terrible thing to have to ask a PhD student, of course, but I always was just sort of like, I don't know, I guess we'll see what happens. It would be great to go into academia, but I could also go into industry, and I'm sure I could find something to work on that would be fun in either place. Secretly also, I wanting to be in academia, but understanding that there's a lot of that is just up to chance. And I applied to industry jobs at the end of my PhD, and in the end, a faculty position was the right mix. But I think just sort of keeping your options open and trying a lot of different things, I think is echoing a lot of what we've already heard.
Okay, awesome. So Francie Clement has a question, and she's going to ask it live. And then I'm going to wrap up by asking each one of you to give a closing comment, volunteering anything that I haven't asked you that you want to share with the group. You will get the last word, so I'll ask each of you to share that. But Francie, why don't you ask your question first?
Thank you, Bernie. So as a follow-up to the previous question, I would like to know, being AI enthusiasts or AI who wants to enter into AI research at this point, from a professor point of view, or from an academician point of view, what are you looking in a current student, to get them selected, to select them out of a pool of candidates that you might have? That's my first question. My second question is that, being in such a busy schedule with a family, a life, and an AI research, which is like the most cutting edge technology right now, how do you keep yourself updated on all the new things that is coming up in your own field, medical brain imaging or anything? How do you manage that and still make time for everything in your life?
So we'll go Anna, then Nidhi, and then Alona this time.
The keeping up, it's been interesting because I was kind of away from academia and coming back, and the first couple of months I did feel like there was kind of a reloading phase where I had to get back to a sense of what's current in my area, because I had been only occasionally following up on it. Practically speaking, reviewing papers is a really good way of knowing what people are working on, for better and for worse. and then going to conferences, like finding the conference in your particular area that stuff tends to be at. And most importantly, acknowledging that you're not going to keep up, that you're not going to know everything. And so a lot of it is like fast triage. Do I actually need to find out more about this? Can I ask somebody nearby about it? Or can I just put it on the to read pile, which will never, ever go away?
Nidhi and then Alona.
Yeah, I agree with Anna. It's not easy to keep up, especially in this field where there's new results every day. The way I do it, yeah, I review papers. I do come across, for example, I come across a lot of interesting work on Twitter because I follow a lot of researchers on Twitter, and people are posting, what they're working on or what paper got accepted or something like that. So I do find a lot of interesting links on Twitter. Conferences, in a way, it's been easy this past year because all conferences have been virtual and you can sort of attend them all, but you can also kind of not attend them all because for conferences, you really need to set aside the time and go listen. And it's too easy when it's virtual to sort of think you could have it in the background while you're working, and you can't do that. So conferences are great. And I plan on learning from my students. I think my students will go find interesting things that they'll dig up, and then I plan on learning from them. And I think you asked a question about time. Yeah, I'm really bad at time management, so I'm not a good one to answer that question.
There was a lot of head nodding when you said students, so that seems to be a real popular one. Alona, what's your secret?
Yeah, so students are absolutely how I stay up to date. So how I learned about deep learning was that my lab at UVic did a directed studies, 4 of them together, where they all went through the deep learning textbook and they had lectures. I just went to the lectures. They gave each other and it was awesome. They taught me so much. And it was a kind of learning that I couldn't have done on my own. And continuously my students know way more than I do about all of the little sort of deep holes they are digging in the research. And so they just sort of bring me along with them, and it's great to hear about what they've discovered and what's interesting to them.
Awesome.
They did also, Fyshe also asked what we look for in students, and I really look for some research experience. So even, we're at the point now that even master's students have to have done something research related. So you have to have done a directed studies or a summer project or a significant thesis, honors thesis. You need to have gotten your feet wet in research and sort of prove to yourself that you like it is really, I think, and what it is, and that you like what it is. And I also want to say something about life balance. Sorry, I wrote them down because I thought there's a lot of interesting things to say there. When I started my PhD, I was married to somebody who was not a grad student. And so that meant that I went home, he had a 9-to-5 job. So I basically had a 9-to-5 job, and I did not really work outside of the typical 9-to-5. I mean, occasionally, you have to, but I've never been a workaholic, and now I have 2 young kids, and I try very hard not to work when they are awake. And so that also it puts very strong constraints on my time. And I just wanted to put it out there that I think it is possible to be successful without being a workaholic.
Wow, that's a great perspective, and good for you. Wow. Because Anna, you're going to get a chance to say one last word. I'm going to come around. We're almost out of time, and I do want to. Some people are leaving already, so I just want to say thank you so much to this panel and to Amii for powering and putting together this session. And I want to give a little commercial for the second part of the series that I mentioned at the beginning. We're going to do a WaiTALK Calgary in a month from now. It's on April the 14th. It's going to be at noon. We're trying the lunch hour spot, and it's going to be the peaks and valleys of careers in applied AI. So not the research focus, but the application. And we have a great panel, and I encourage you to sign up and attend that one as well. And I also wanted to give a plug for the initiative for AlbertaWomen.AI Kickstart. It's a program that women can take, university-age women resident in the province of Alberta, to understand more about what the potential is for them for a career in AI. So please take a look. It's on the Amii website, amii.ca/training/kickstart. And with that, I'm now going to go to the panelists and ask them to share one last share that they haven't, something they want to say that they haven't had a chance yet. So I'll go Nidhi, Anna, and then I'll end with Alona. So Nidhi.
Well, just the last thing fresh on my mind was just to echo what Alona said about the work-life balance. It was easy to do for me in France because that's just how everyone does it. They go home and then they don't work. They don't check email on the weekend. They take their 4-week vacation in the summer and they're gone. Like they're not checking their email. They're not answering messages. And I really like that. When I came back to Canada, I found that this was not true here at all. People send emails at all times of day. And, you know, I'm learning now to set my own limits, like set my own boundaries, you know, and not follow along with what everyone is doing. So I think it's important to have that work-life balance. Otherwise, you're just feeling submerged all the time and tired.
Okay, Anna, and then Alona.
Yeah, I'm also going to springboard off something Alona said, which was just emphasizing the learning from students is so important. This is not something I realized until later on in my academic career, that there's not this sharp divide where you're a student and then you're a professor and you know everything. It turns out at any point, you know more about everything you've specifically experienced than a lot of other people, and you have your own interests. And that is actually the most fertile ground for learning new things is having people share just from their perspective what they're passionate about. Not to flog a point too much about diversity, but like really, it is really, Alona not knowing about deep learning would have been a worse timeline, but it was because her students got together to learn about it. And that's just, don't underestimate your own importance in directing things, in providing insights.
Awesome. Alona, you get the last word.
Oh, that's sad because I already said what I want to say, which is that I think it's possible to be successful with while keeping constraints on the hours you're willing to work. I think that I just wanted to drive that message home.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you on behalf of Wai and WaiTalk, or Wai Edmonton, I guess, which I represent. And thank you again to the panel. You did an extraordinary job. We really appreciate you sharing so openly and so candidly about your own life experiences. Also to the attendees, thank you for joining us. We hope that you'll tune into other WaiTalks, particularly the one in Calgary, or that Calgary's hosting next month. And yeah, really appreciate everybody's participation today. There were some great things in the chat, some links to some of the things that I mentioned. So if you haven't seen them, please take a look. But with that, we'll conclude and say thanks and have a great evening, everyone.